Hey, Steve Mignani here at Bernardston Auto Wrecking in Bernardstown, Massachusetts, doing the junkyard crawl with a 1980 Chevy El Camino. Now, we all know, of course, the El Camino arrived in 1959 and went through many different variations, changing with the times. And by 1980, when this thing was built, the times they were a-changin'. In fact, in 1979, the Iranian Revolution triggered another spike in oil prices. In fact, a barrel of oil went to $39 a barrel, which doesn't sound like much, but that was a doubling. And for the first time ever, gasoline went to $1 a gallon at the pump, which made smaller cars like this a good idea. Now, luckily, GM already downsized the El Camino and the Malibu, etc. in 1978. And this, again, is a 1980, so the third model year for the downsized El Camino. Now, the one thing we find on this one is the engine. This is a V6, a very small little thing. This is a 200 cubic inch V6 right here, 3.3 liters. And this was the base engine in El Camino. You could get a 305 and even a 350 in certain times and years, but this little 200 cube six popper right here was in its final year for 1980. Why? It was just too small to do the job. But again, it got better fuel economy. We can thank OPEC for the whole emphasis on fuel economy, but it was a nutless wonder. For 1981, the 229 V6, 29 cubic inches bigger, would replace this thing as the base engine. Now, this right here is a brochure from 1978, the first year for the downsizing. Good news! Oh, for 78, we're downsizing our cars. Well, it's good and bad. Again, it was brought on by OPEC and the looming crisis in Iran and other parts of the world. But here's the downsized Malibu. You know, it's not a bad-looking car, frankly. But again, these are about 20% smaller than the 77s that they replaced. Not a bad little rig, you know. And very popular today, certainly. And of course, good bones for drag racing. But again, they were smaller cars, and the American public actually accepted them, you know, as they should. But here on the right, there's the El Camino right there. And it says here, its wheelbase has increased from 116 to 117 inches to help provide a smooth, easy ride, yet shorter and slimmer than last year's 1977. So here's the thing. They had the same 38 cubic feet of load and same 800-pound capacity as the big El Camino of 77. So they didn't lose too much except under the hood. And we'll get to more of that in a second. Here's the wagons, you know, pretty popular stuff. Now, here's the big thing about this engine. Right here on the left, it says here, new V6 standard, a fuel-efficient new 3.3 liter, 200 cubic inch V6 with manual 3-speed, yeah, 3-speed, is standard. Efficient V6 design. The V6 engine represents a blend of 6-cylinder and V8 design characteristics. Although the engine block and cylinder heads are cast iron, the V6 configuration makes these new engines more compact than conventional V8 and lighter than last year's inline 6. To that point, the 250 straight 6 of 1977 made 110 horsepower, 190 foot-pounds. The 200 made 95 horsepower, 160 foot-pounds. And the crazy thing is, the OPEC thing, this is right here. This is a mile per gallon statement, which the federal government in 1978 said that thou shalt have cafe, not a caffeinated drink, but rather corporate average fuel economy. And they said that, hey, GM, Ford, Chrysler, everybody, add up all your cars, divide the mile per gallon. You better be 18 miles per gallon or we're going to fine you. And of course, now it's something like 29 miles per gallon. But here we have the different engine combinations, and all the car makers had to work with the government and come up with statements on what kind of fuel economy, and there it is right there. The 3.3 liter with light duty emissions standard will get 2129 with the manual, 1925 with the automatic, and again, a nutless wonder. But again, this is how influential the OPEC oil crisis of 1973 and subsequent events like the Iranian Revolution of 1979 would be on the auto industry. Good and bad, you call it. Now, the thing is, the price on this when it was new was $5,911. If you were thinking about buying a Chevy C10 pickup truck, you'd have the load capacity, but not the car element. And in fact, the Chevy pickup was $406 less than an El Camino, and that was base price. So these were, you know, not inexpensive, but they also combined the workhorse nature of a pickup truck and the convenience and comfort of a passenger car. Let's look inside here. And, you know, they're large cars inside, at least as large as a Malibu would be. This one here has the automatic on the column. 85-mile-an-hour speedometer, we can see that, and that was a federal mandate starting, I think, in 1975. And here's the crazy part. This 85-mile-an-hour speedometer stuff was a little bit silly. The idea is it's brainwashed the public into keeping the 55-mile-per-hour national limit, and if it shows 120, they'll try and do it. If it only says 85, maybe they won't go 85. Well, that was a bit of a little psychological ploy, kind of goofy, and it was actually rescinded in 1982. Ronald Reagan said that 85-mile-an-hour stuff on the speedometer, you don't have to do it anymore. But car makers kept doing it until about 1990 or so. Kind of weird. But with that said, 85 miles an hour, I can't drive 55. I don't know about you, Sammy Hagar, but inside the door, something kind of cool and not so cool. Starting in 1970, VIN stickers, which are so important to any car's identity, were made of stickers, vinyl. And look what happens. They delaminate. In 1969, these were made of metal. But so you can't really tell much about the model year or any of that kind of stuff here. But it is a 1980. We can kind of suss out certain details. In fact, we see here a 03 MR80. The manufacturer of the sticker itself, the stock, that 80 is certainly 1980. This also has an A in the 6th spot of the VIN on the dash. We know it's a 1980 vehicle. But other stickers here that are kind of interesting. Here is tire and rim information. Now this is an El Camino. Front and rear tires, P205 7514s. And again, radial tires have less rolling resistance, better for fuel economy. Rims, 14x6 on El Camino. Narrower wheels on Malibus, 5.5. Kind of interesting. And down here, Superlift air shocks. Yes, air shocks were standard on all El Caminos in the 78 through 87 period. Why? Well, the air shocks allowed you to air up when you had that 700 plus load in the back and not sag, or air them down and just run them normal when you didn't want the tail to sit up high. And speaking of where and how do you air those things up, this is the gas filler. It says unleaded fuel only. Of course, no leaded fuels after 1972, mandated. And under here, we can see right here the Schrader valve. This thing here, that's standard on all El Caminos. And with this, you would just undo that puppy and fill up your air shocks in the back. Here's one of the vinyl lines here, split. That's one of the things about vinyl, is that when it gets old, it tends to do that, you know. But with that said, the factory air shocks, not an add-on, that's factory stuff. But again, this is a 200 cubic inch inline six, and again, or V6 I should say, the final year right here for the 200 cuber. 1981 would bring the 229, because these were just so gutless. And with that automatic, I can only imagine 0 to 60 in, I don't know, 20 seconds, something like that, probably 15. Now getting back to the old days, this is the El Camino that this car replaced. Now up to 1977, these were built. Here's a 74 catalog. And the cool stuff in here is that you could actually get an SS 454 4-speed in 1974 in your El Camino. And you can see right here, El Camino SS. Specify either the 2 or 4 barrel version of the Turbofire 350 or the Turbojet 454 and turbohydromatic transmission, or the close ratio 4-speed 454 V8 only. How cool would that be? SS 454 El Camino. And here we have here that the circle there in green says, when you load your El Camino and the rear end settles a bit, it's easy to restore an even keel. More air into the rear shock absorbers with the special valve and the rear license plate. Now again, on the previous El Camino, it was behind the plate, whereas on these downside El Caminos, it was behind the fuel filler door. But look at this, the 454 4-speed, how cool would that be? Now the 454 would be gone after 1975, the 400 V8 after 1976. So as Detroit got more and more squished and squashed by the OPEC problem. Now this right here is a 1982 El Camino factory brochure, and we can see a classy looking car. It looks like a Malibu, it looks like a truck. But again, this was $406 more costly than a C10 pickup truck in base form. But again, Super Sport was still possible. At this point, not much more than a sticker package, but the various types were the basic El Camino, the Conquista, Super Sport, and the Royal Knights. But up on the top left, look, it says here, we think El Camino is one of the most striking pickups on the road today, and they make no reference at all to their biggest competitor, the Ford Ranchero, which was basically the similar package. So we look at the back of this one here, and one of the things that allowed this downsized El Camino to have the same capacity as the larger 1977, it was a little bit of sleight of hand they played. If you look at the rear window and the bed, it's curved right there. That added a bunch of cargo volume to do this little trick right here. If that was flat across, you wouldn't have nearly as much bed. But by putting the front of the bed right to the back of the seats, they absolutely had as much capacity as the bigger 1977 through 73 El Caminos that these replaced. Just walk around to this side here. into the shrubs and the grass. Here's a couple of fenders. This one here says Malibu. So these fenders, I'm pretty sure, will swap onto an El Camino. Fairly certain that the front clip was about the same, unlike earlier renditions of the El Camino where you can't really swap the fenders because they were quite different in the terms of the shapes. This one here is a base vehicle. This is a sunroof. Don't confuse this with a factory sunroof. This is almost certainly a day two or a dealer add-on piece right here. They're good and they're bad. You know, the sunroof itself isn't so bad. It's got a built-in sort of shade, but somebody had to cut out the roof. Once it's done, it's forever. And then sealing this thing and installing it, you better hope they did it right, otherwise the leaks aren't going to be any fun. And again, it's not really pretty. It looks like an add-on because it is an add-on. Kind of a minus in my book. But anyway, let's see if we can. That door doesn't want to open. Sport mirrors, kind of cool. This one was last on the road in July of 1999 when that expired. And here's the front of the frame. Now on this one here, we know that El Caminos, like wagons, have a boxed frame all the way from the front to the back. But on this one here, we can see these hollows right inside of here. These would contain the shock absorbers, which were part of the energy absorbing front bumper on these things starting in 1973, but again, they've been taken out and harvested for some other use. But this engine is, again, this is a 200 cubic inch V6 power plant. Here's the HEI ignition, the Verijet carburetor, and regular viewer of Junkyard Crawl, Google user GP, loves these carburetors. I'm sure he'll comment on how good these things are, not just kidding around. But that's the story of how, you know, energy crises from 1979 or 1973 played a big role in how Detroit automakers and the whole world designed their cars, and how little engines like this were eventually realized for what they were: too underpowered and eventually replaced by bigger engines. So we got a 200 cuber for the final time in 1980. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to the Steve Maggs YouTube channel, share this video with your friends, give us a thumbs up, and by all means hit the bell so you know when the next video hits, which is tomorrow morning.